This is not a hopeful message. It's a letter written despite everything. My name is Paulo. I'm Brazilian. I'm 42 years old, and this channel is a quiet space I created to speak honestly about things that are hard to carry alone. I'm not a therapist. I'm not here to give advice, solutions, or instructions on how to live. I live with social anxiety, and I'm on the autism spectrum. For most of my life, I've tried to understand why the world feels heavier, louder, and more demanding than it seems to feel for other people. I chose to make this channel in English for a simple reason. Distance helps me speak more clearly, and because these feelings are not limited to one language, one country, or one culture. This is not a place for quick answers. It's not a place for motivation or promises. It's a place for recognition, for naming experiences that often stay invisible, and for speaking, quietly, about what it's like to exist when the usual narratives don't quite fit. This video is written as a letter, not because I believe in turning points or symbolic dates, but because sometimes writing is a way of staying present, even when certainty is absent. I want to be honest about where this letter comes from. It doesn't come from a moment of clarity. It doesn't come from peace. And it doesn't come from believing that things are about to change. It comes from a long relationship with pressure, one that started before I had language for anxiety, before I understood how differently my mind and body respond to the world. Growing up, work and money were never abstract ideas in my family. They were concrete. They were survival. They were safety. My parents came from very little, and what they built required constant effort, vigilance, and sacrifice. So the message was never cruel, but it was firm. Work hard. Don't fall behind. Don't lose what was built. Be strong, especially when it's difficult. Those ideas shaped me deeply. Because my parents worked in commerce, the end of the year was never just a date on a calendar. It was the most important moment of the year. The peak. The time when pressure intensified and everything seemed to matter more. More work, more urgency, more expectation. That rhythm entered my nervous system very early. Before I knew what anxiety was. Before I understood why crowded environments drained me. Before I knew that social interaction required much more energy from me than from others. When I became an adult, I didn't question that rhythm. I stepped directly into it. I worked in my parents' business. Later, I opened my own company in the same field. Looking back now, I can see how intense that choice was for someone like me. I was already living with social anxiety, already struggling with overstimulation, performance, and constant interaction, already navigating the world with a nervous system that needed more time, more quiet, more safety. And still, I chose a profession built on exposure, on negotiation, on urgency, on being on all the time, especially at the end of the year. At the time, I didn't see this as self-betrayal. I saw it as responsibility, as doing what was expected, as proving that I was capable. For a long time, I believed that discomfort meant growth, that pressure was something you simply had to endure, that if it felt overwhelming, it was because I wasn't trying hard enough. That belief stayed with me even after I left that professional world. The end of the year never stopped being heavy. Even now, long after changing paths, something about this period forces me to stop and evaluate myself harshly. What did I accomplish? What didn't move? Where should I be by now? And the most painful part is that this evaluation doesn't remain abstract. It becomes personal. It becomes a judgment about my worth. When I look at my life honestly, I don't see the kind of visible progress that society celebrates. I didn't accumulate the markers that signal success. I didn't arrive where I was supposed to arrive. Saying that out loud is still difficult. Not because it's untrue, but because I was raised to believe that value is proven through results you can point to. Money, stability, growth, you can measure. So when those markers aren't there, something inside me interprets that as failure. Every year, the same cycle returns. I look back and feel behind. I look forward and feel uncertain. The future doesn't feel open, it feels demanding. Questions repeat themselves quietly, but relentlessly. How will I support my family? How will I provide for my daughter? How do I create stability when I don't feel stable inside? And underneath all of those questions, there's a deeper one I rarely say out loud. What does it actually mean to grow in life? Because for most of my life, growth was defined in very concrete terms. More work, more money, more structure, more certainty. But my internal experience doesn't move in straight lines. Progress, for me, often looks invisible from the outside. It looks like surviving long periods of anxiety, like learning how to stay present instead of shutting down, like continuing even when confidence is absent. And yet, when the end of the year arrives, none of that seems to count. Only what can be seen matters. That's why this season feels so heavy. Not because I lack ambition, not because I don't care, but because I care deeply, and I measure myself against a system that was never designed for the way my nervous system works. This letter doesn't exist to ask for sympathy. It exists because pretending that this weight isn't real feels dishonest, and because staying silent about it has never made it lighter. When I try to understand why this weight becomes so intense at certain times of the year, I don't begin with diagnoses or labels. I begin with the body, with the nervous system, with how pressure is learned, stored, and repeated over time. For a long time, I believed that this feeling meant something was wrong with me, that I was weaker than others, less resilient, less capable of handling life. But slowly, through reading, observing myself, and listening to how other people describe similar experiences, something became clearer. What I experience isn't a personal flaw, it's a pattern. And patterns usually have reasons. One of the most important things I've learned is that the human nervous system doesn't distinguish very well between different kinds of threat. To the body, social threat can feel just as real as physical danger. Being evaluated, being compared, being judged, being measured. These things activate the same stress responses as situations where survival is at risk. So when society turns time into a scoreboard, especially at the end of the year, the body reacts accordingly. Heart rate changes, muscles tense, thoughts accelerate. Sleep becomes lighter. This isn't imagination, it's physiology. For people who live with anxiety, this response tends to activate more easily and stay active longer. The system becomes hypervigilant, always scanning, always anticipating what might go wrong. And time itself becomes part of the threat. For many people, time feels open, flexible, forgiving. But for anxious nervous systems, time often feels like pressure, deadlines, expectations, unfinished tasks that turn into some. The end of the year intensifies this because it creates an artificial sense of closure. As if life were supposed to make sense in 12-month cycles. As if progress were supposed to be visible, measurable, and consistent. But psychologically, that's rarely how human growth works. Especially not for people who carry anxiety, social sensitivity, or neurodivergent traits. Another concept that helped me understand myself better is something called threat-based learning. When the brain experiences repeated stress without resolution, it learns to expect danger even when none is present. It doesn't wait for proof, it anticipates. So, instead of asking, "How am I doing?" the mind asks, "What did I miss? What didn't change? What went wrong?" This is why rumination becomes so strong at the end of the year. The brain isn't reflecting, it's scanning for threat. And because anxious brains tend to remember discomfort more vividly than neutral experiences, the past gets distorted. Moments of effort disappear. Moments of survival are ignored. Only what feels unfinished remains visible. For people on the autism spectrum, even lightly, there is often an additional layer. The world itself can feel demanding in ways that are hard to explain. Social rules are rarely explicit. Expectations change depending on context. Feedback is often indirect or ambiguous. This requires constant interpretation, constant adjustment, constant cognitive effort. Over time, this effort accumulates. What looks like not doing much from the outside may represent enormous internal work. Managing sensory input, monitoring tone, masking discomfort, trying to appear functional. But because this work doesn't translate into visible achievements, it often goes unrecognized, even by the person doing it. So when society asks for proof of progress, the system struggles to answer. Not because nothing happened, but because what happened was internal. There is also something important about how anxious and autistic minds relate to uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable for most people, but for nervous systems that already operate near capacity, uncertainty can feel overwhelming. The future stops feeling like possibility. It starts feeling like threat. Questions about work, money, stability, and responsibility don't stay abstract. They become visceral. How will I manage? What if I can't keep up? What if I never catch up? These are not predictions. They are stress responses. The brain is trying to protect itself by imagining worst-case scenarios because certainty, even negative certainty, feels safer than the unknown. Understanding this changed the way I speak to myself. Instead of asking why I can't handle pressure the way others seem to, I began asking what my nervous system has been carrying for years. Because nervous systems that grow up in environments of constant demand learn to stay alert, to anticipate loss, to equate rest with danger. When effort is constantly required to maintain safety, emotional or financial, the system doesn't relax easily, even when the external situation changes. This is why certain seasons reactivate old patterns. The body remembers. It remembers urgency, evaluation, scarcity, and it responds automatically. This doesn't mean we are broken. It means we adapted. Another idea that helped me find some relief is understanding that progress doesn't always mean expansion. Sometimes it means stabilization. Sometimes growth looks like fewer breakdowns, longer pauses before spiraling, greater awareness of internal states. These shifts are subtle. They don't show up on timelines or balance sheets, but they matter. Modern culture often ignores this kind of progress because it can't be quantified, but psychology recognizes it as real. The nervous system learns slowly, and safety is not learned through pressure. It's learned through repetition, predictability, and compassion, including self-compassion. When I look at my experience through this lens, the end of the year stops feeling like a final judgment. It starts feeling like a moment that exposes how much weight has been carried quietly. Not just by me, but by many people whose paths don't match the dominant narrative. And this understanding doesn't solve everything, but it softens the story. It replaces "I failed" with "I survived conditions that were difficult for me." And that distinction matters, because without it, the mind keeps repeating the same harsh conclusion. And with it, something else becomes possible. Not hope, at least not the kind that promises change, but clarity. And sometimes, clarity is enough to keep going. There is a thought that tends to return very quietly at this time of year. It doesn't arrive as panic. It doesn't shout. It doesn't even feel dramatic. It settles in slowly. Sometimes it appears as a sentence. Sometimes just as a weight. Sometimes as a vague discomfort that follows me through the day. I didn't change enough. Not in comparison to other people, necessarily, but in comparison to an internal expectation. An idea of who I thought I would be by now. How I imagined I would feel. How different life would look once enough time had passed. This thought doesn't come from logic, and it doesn't respond well to logic either. I know, intellectually, that growth isn't linear. I know that effort doesn't always lead to visible results. I know that surviving certain years already requires strength. But emotionally, that knowledge often doesn't register. Because this thought isn't about facts. It's about time. And time, when filtered through anxiety, behaves differently. Instead of flowing, it accumulates. Instead of opening possibilities, it closes doors. The end of the year intensifies this, because it turns time into something measurable, countable, comparable. Months become evidence. Years become verdicts. And suddenly, everything that didn't move becomes louder than everything that did. This is where rumination begins. Not reflection, rumination. Reflection asks questions and allows space for answers. Rumination repeats the same question without allowing resolution. What did I miss? Why am I still here? How did so much time pass without things changing? These thoughts don't seek clarity. They seek certainty. And anxious minds crave certainty, even if it hurts. Because uncertainty feels worse. Rumination is not a character flaw. It's not a lack of gratitude. And it's not It's the nervous system trying to regain control by replaying the past. If I go over it enough times, maybe I'll understand where things went wrong. If I analyze every decision, maybe I can prevent future pain. If I find the mistake, maybe I can fix myself. But rumination doesn't lead to insight. It leads to exhaustion. Because the mind keeps circling the same conclusions. I stayed the same. I didn't evolve. I'm still dealing with the same issues. And when those thoughts repeat long enough, they start to feel like identity. I am the one who didn't move. I am the one who didn't become. I am the one who failed to arrive. This is especially painful in a world that celebrates acceleration. Everything around us suggests that life should be moving forward visibly. Careers progressing, goals being reached, stories being completed. Social media reinforces this relentlessly. End-of-year summaries, achievements lists, plans for what comes next. Even silence becomes loud in that context. And when you live with anxiety or neurodivergence, comparison doesn't remain external. It becomes internalized. You don't just see where others are. You measure yourself against where you think you should be. And that imagined version of yourself is always ahead. Always more functional. Always more stable. Always less tired. That version doesn't struggle with energy. Doesn't hesitate socially. Doesn't need recovery time. It exists only in your head, but it feels real enough to judge you. This is where the end of the year becomes particularly cruel. Because it invites a comparison not only with others, but with an imagined self that was never realistic to begin with. For people on the autism spectrum, even lightly, this internal comparison can be especially confusing. Autistic development doesn't follow standard timelines. Skills emerge unevenly. Energy fluctuates. Progress happens in bursts and pauses. But society expects consistency. So when an autistic or highly anxious person looks back, the timeline doesn't make sense. There are gaps, plateaus, periods of intense effort with little external reward. And instead of interpreting this as a different developmental pattern, the mind interprets it as failure. I should be further by now. That sentence alone carries enormous weight, because it assumes there is a universal schedule, a correct pace, a standard outcome. And if you don't match it, something must be wrong with you. This belief is rarely questioned. It's absorbed quietly over time. From school, from work, from family conversations, from cultural expectations. By the time we notice it, it already feels like truth. Another layer of this pressure comes from responsibility. As life progresses, responsibility increases. Providing, supporting others. Maintaining stability. For anxious minds, responsibility doesn't feel motivating. It feels heavy. Not because we don't care, but because we care deeply and doubt our capacity constantly. So at the end of the year, when responsibility meets uncertainty, fear intensifies. What if I can't sustain this? What if next year is harder? What if I never feel capable enough? These questions don't come from laziness. They come from hyper-responsibility, from holding yourself to impossible standards, from believing that rest equals risk. And underneath all of this, there is grief. Grief for the life that felt simpler. Grief for versions of the future that never arrived. Grief for the ease you see in others and don't recognize in yourself. But this grief often goes unnamed. Instead of mourning, we criticize. Instead of acknowledging loss, we push harder. And pushing harder when the system is already overwhelmed only deepens the cycle. At some point, something begins to shift. Not because the pressure disappears, but because exhaustion forces a pause. You start noticing that no amount of self-criticism has ever made you feel safer. That no amount of replaying the past has ever created peace. And slowly, reluctantly, another possibility appears. What if staying alive through difficult conditions is not stagnation? What if maintaining your ground in a hostile environment is not failure? What if moving slowly is not the same as not moving at all? These questions don't erase the pressure, but they soften its edges. They create space for a different story to coexist with the old one. A story where effort counts, even when it isn't visible. Where stability is valued over speed. Where presence matters more than performance. This doesn't mean the end of the year stops being uncomfortable. Time markers will probably always activate something inside anxious nervous systems. But discomfort doesn't have to turn into You can acknowledge the weight without turning it into a verdict. You can notice the thoughts without accepting them as truth. I didn't change. Enough is not a fact. It's a feeling. And feelings, no matter how convincing, are not timeline. Sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is to stay without rewriting your entire story as failure. And it still isn't. I don't know how things will unfold. I don't know what will change. And I don't trust easy promises about the future. But this letter exists. It exists because staying silent felt heavier than speaking. Because continuing, even without clarity, felt more honest than pretending certainty. If you're here, listening to this until the end, maybe this letter wasn't written for you, but it was written with you in mind. Not to offer answers. Not to fix anything. Just to say, staying is not nothing. Speaking is not weakness. And existing, despite everything, still counts. This was not a hopeful message. It was a letter written despite everything. Before this video ends, I want to say one last thing. If anything you heard here felt familiar, if some part of this put words to something you've carried quietly, you're welcome here. If you feel like it, you can like this video or subscribe to the channel. Not as a favor, but as a way of keeping spaces like this alive. And if you know someone who might see themselves in these words, someone who has a hard time explaining what they feel, you can share this video with them. Sometimes we don't need advice. We just need to feel recognized. Thank you for being here. The music will stay with you for a while.
There's a quiet weight in the air tonight, not heavy enough to fall, just enough to stay like words I've carried for years without knowing who they were for. I've learned to walk without asking if the ground will understand. Some days I move, some days I don't. Both still count. I don't need the world to soften, I just need it to listen without trying to fix me. I'm still here, not loud and not fast, I just here, learning how to stay without forcing myself to fit. And these lines are not instructions, they're not a warning sign. There's something closer to a letter left open on the table of the world. I don't ask for understanding, only space for slower answers, for quieter ways to be alive. If I pause, let it mean presence, not absence. If I stay still, let it mean I stay. I'm still here without proof or finish line, still here, learning how to breathe inside moments that don't explain themselves. This is a letter written quietly, despite everything, Despite the noise, despite the counting, despite the fear of not becoming, I'm still here, still human, still trying in my own rhythm that has to be enough.